Well, welcome everybody. My name's Anthony Taylor. I'm here to talk to you about competence under the new regime. My background being that I've been in risk management, governance, health and safety, business continuity, etc., all that sort of thing for about the last 35 years. The last 15 years I've been working for property consultancies, mainly in central London, but around the nation. The last 5 years I've been involved with the competence, development of competence post the Dame Judith Hackitt's report. I was asked to be the interim chair of Working Group 8, which was looking at the building safety manager's competence. As we all know, that role does no longer exist. So we went back to the PAS and rewrote it to reflect the management of safety, building safety in residential buildings. I sit on a number of other committees and groups, including some of the professional bodies, sort of life safety or similar groups. So I'd like to think I've got a good idea of where this is all coming from. So without further ado, I'll carry on. We've got a couple of times for question at the end. So hopefully this will be of use to you and of interest. I'm starting with Dame Judith Hackitt, as I've just mentioned. Without you may have read that before, but I want to draw your attention to the final sentence there. There is no doubt at all that competence and accreditation is going to be a major feature of the future. Now that was stated some years ago, and an enormous amount of work has been done right there across the built environment to look at what competence is there, how it's judged, how it's accredited, whether it's accredited, how people are checking it, and so on and so forth. And it's that I'm going to talk you through now. So I'll carry on. Competence has been sort of redefined, and we're all very used to being checked for our skills, knowledge, and experience. But what Dame Judith recognised in her report was that actually it's the behaviour of the individual. So you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't concern yourself with the accuracy of the work you do, you don't apply yourself to the work, you don't have the integrity, then actually all the skills, knowledge and experience are a waste of time. So behaviours have been added into the measurement of competence, if I use that expression in the widest sense. So we're now looking at skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours. I'll come back to that in a minute to explain it. The regulations, just as a note, when regulations and or PASs or guidance documents are written, they use the expression person. Now, a person in law can mean either an individual or an organisation. So we just need, when you're reading these documents, just be careful to read carefully. It could mean either or both an organisation or an individual. But the regulations generally now require that require that anybody and everybody who's employed, the responsibility is on the employer to make sure they're employing competent people, but also on those people who consider themselves competent not to stretch over their competence. And that is part of the behaviours measure. You need to know the limit of your own competence and be prepared to say, no, that's not for me. We need further help or further guidance. Yeah. Part of the work that the competence steering group, which is where all these working groups were sat, one of the earliest things we did was deliver something called a BSI Flex 8670, built environment overarching framework, the competence of individuals for everyone working on a building. Now, the point of that was right at the top of the tree, and I'll get into a bit more detail. I just want to get in your mind now. There is this framework for individuals as opposed to organisations, which sets out the basic competence requirements that anyone in the built environment should be working with or mapped to. So all the organisation, professional bodies, trade bodies, etc., have taken this document 8670 and have taken it into their organisation, and right now, or they have already and are working from it, is mapping the competences they've got within their discipline or their organisation or whatever it happens to be, and mapping the competences of their people map fairly directly to 8670. That's the point of that document. Subsequent to that, we have developed 867, 1, 2 and 3, I was involved with all of them, but I was the lead, industry lead on 8673, which, as I said a little bit earlier, relates to the competence requirements for the management of safety in residential buildings. So it's specifically aimed to be read by both individuals and organisations, and it applies to that. I'll go into a bit more detail as we go through. The HSE, and indeed the Building Safety Regulator, you know we've all got a new regulator, are very keen and very focused on competence. This is a slide. I've had permission from them to use it, but they are there to promote competence. They are looking very clearly at the competence of their own people for obvious reasons. They're having to build up a complete new regulator and ensure that those who are working on the enforcement side are competent to do so. And that will include all the building control people. Those who are in that sort of arena of work will know that the concept of approved inspectors, where let's say a developer could go and choose a building inspector of their own choice, all those days are gone. All the building control officers are now going to be under the control or under the regulation of the building safety regulator. And when you're developing, you're going to have to take what you're given. You're not going to be able to choose your own building control officer. But that is, by way of example, how keen the regulator is going to be focused on competence. And they have a statutory duty to set up a competence committee, which will be called the Independent Competence Committee. While that is being set up, there has been in place for probably nigh on a year now the interim Independent Competence Committee. Their job is to scan the built environment and understand what competences are there, where are the gaps, and to work over the following years, and it may be many years, to raise the whole level of competence across the piece. So I happen to know, have written to a number of the big professional bodies and big employers to say, well, what are you doing? You know what's coming in the Building Safety Act. You know the requirements of competence. What are you doing to make sure all your employees are competent? I haven't seen the results coming back from that letter. I'm not sure they'll ever be published, but they are going to take a very proactive role out there in industry. Again, they are there to implement, and this is the point I wanted to make on this slide, to implement a path to culture change. You will have heard a lot about this, and this comes back to the point of behaviours in individuals. And the way that we are looking at a competent organisation. Of course, an organisation in itself cannot be competent, but the organisation needs to have competent people within it. And the way we are looking at perhaps measuring organisations in this new regime is to look at how what their culture is. Is their culture truly open door? Are those that raise questions encouraged to raise questions? Are the people who, let us say, feel that they have extended their competence to the limit and they need to go back somewhere else? Are they being supported in that? So that's the sort of thing we'll be looking at within an organisation, to make sure that they are open-minded to criticism, such that they have a much healthier culture than perhaps here too. Where does competence sit? By this, I mean, who in your organisation is just making sure that the people that you employ are competent? Is it the HR department? Is it the safety department? Is it a mixture between the two? Because, as I say, the competencies are going to be checked and they're going to need to be managed. An organisation, or in fact an individual, is going to need to make sure they keep up their CPD. They know what the latest things are, and this is going to need to be measured and managed and monitored and recorded, because in the event of an incident, or in the event that your organisation or you individually are going to be asked to do a job, you should be being asked, are you competent to do this particular job? Now, if it's an HRB, you may be an absolutely excellent architect or absolutely excellent electrician or whatever it happens to be, but have you got the experience of working on a tall building? Because there are added dangers and risks, and people need to do that. So there's quite a lot in all this. Yeah. Just by way of a warning, the safety case, which you will have heard of, is just a collection of information. That is where I would suspect that you will want to keep your records of competence checks and due diligence. The safety case report will be expecting organisations to explain how the competence is monitored within that particular building. Yeah. And the safety case reports are going to be called in every 5 years. And one of the things I know they're going to check is how do they manage competence? How do they know that only competent people are operating in this building? Yeah. And that will, of course, lead to the fact that management of competence is part of the management of your safety management system. I put a little note on the bottom there saying, because there's an awful lot of data management now coming, with safety cases, golden threads and the like, I would suspect that people are going to need to think quite carefully how well and how competent they are at data management. And it's not just moving data to and fro, it's verifying that this information that you've got is actually accurate and current. So that's just a sort of side thought. Overview of the Act. Part 3 requires the client to undertake due diligence of a principal designer and a principal contractor. That's not new. We've had that in CDM. However, Part 3 of the Building Safety Act requires that the PD and the PC have to sign off that the design and the construction work that they've delivered is in compliance with building regs. So there is a new competence necessary for people who take that, or more generally organisations, that they know building regs inside out, because they're going to have to sign it off for 15 years. Or fact, people can go back and the liabilities has gone back 15 years as well. So those organisations who act as a principal contractor or principal designer are going to have go and have a look at their competence, and particularly look at the requirements they have in Part 3. And as you will note, we have developed a PAS, one for each of those, 8671 and 8672, which specifically look at the requirements for the PD and the PC under the Building Safety Act, which is in addition to their obligations under CDM. Yeah. Fire Safety Act requires additional competence of fire risk assessors, and that those appointing them undertake due diligence. By that, we need to say what skill level do you want from your fire risk? How complex is your building? Because you need to match the skills and the competence of the fire risk assessor, for example, with the complexity of the building. You can't have somebody who's just started in the job looking at a complex tall building, perhaps. And there is guidance out there. In fact, there's a tool on the government's website to try and help you find that. Part 4, which is the bit of the Building Safety Act that looks at managing of safety in occupation, requires that the principal accountable person or the accountable person appoints competent persons. Now, again, just remind ourselves that persons can mean an organisation or an individual. So they've got to appoint competent individuals or competent organisations. And it requires that those competent persons do not undertake work that they're not competent to do. And that's, again, looking at the actual job that you're looking at, and not necessarily you need to have experience of the job that you're being asked to do. Now, that might be progressive. And of course, you've got to work your way up the experience from perhaps a less complex situation to a more complex one. That leads us to how are you going to judge someone's competence, and indeed how will the regulator judge people when and if they need to do so for whatever reason. And there'll be 2 particular reasons. One is in the event of an incident. First thing they'll do is say, who designed this work pattern, who's done this, who's designed this, who's built this, and were they competent to do so. And then one will have to evidence A, that the person who undertook the work activity, whatever it happens to be, is competent to do so, and B, that the person who employed them did adequate due diligence to make sure that they found the right person to do the job in the first place. Very quickly, 8670, this is the overarching one that sits at the top. I put a link in there, but you can go to the BSI website and you can download all these PAS documents. 8670, as I say, is the overarching one. That's now been in play for a year and a bit, and the work is going on to turn that into a formal British standard. And the Flex is a sort of substandard, and we use that in order to get it out there as quick as possible for people to get experience. Yeah. Next one. Where are you going to find competence? You've either got it in-house, but you'll need to check that you've got the right levels of competence for all the activities you undertake, or you've got to go out and get it from somewhere else. Yeah. So either way, it means that those who are procuring services, whether it's a buying office or it's a manager or who wants to go and get someone else to do something, or somebody's going to bring someone else to do it, they need to have a look at the skills, knowledge and experience of those people that they're doing, which inevitably means that you need to specify quite carefully what it is you're expecting this competent person to do, because someone's got to judge whether they are competent to undertake the specification that you've given them. So we're looking at, both the employers and those who are holding themselves as a competent to make sure they can do it, can manage the work that's been set out in the specification. When an organisation is owned, as I'm looking at the bottom, it means that within an organisation, to hold up that organisation is competent and resourced adequately to undertake the work that it holds itself out as capable of doing, they need to have somebody or a number of people in the organisation who need to be competent. It's likely that they're going to be quite senior, because they will be in charge of a number of people who are competent to do various other things. So it's not suggesting the senior person is an expert in everything. They need to have adequate competence to understand pretty well what the people below them for whom they're responsible are doing. Otherwise, you can't manage them. Yeah. And if you can't find it in-house, someone's got to go out and subcontract the competence. And again, that is coming back to the procurement, specifying exactly what you need and then doing adequate due diligence to do it. I mentioned behaviours. This is a table from 8670. I just wanted to look very quickly at some of the, if we look at the core competence criteria very quickly, this is what is meant by behaviours. Act ethically, right? That might mean, not turning a blind eye to something you've seen that isn't very good. It's reporting it. It's act ethically, absolutely fundamental. Demonstrate leadership, teamwork and communication as either an individual or as a member of a team. Collaborate, communicate. Manage individuals and contribute to organisational competence. Yeah, manage your own competence. Make sure the management of competence of others where it's necessary. Demonstrate personal responsibility and accountability. So the two real new things here is a real focus on act ethically and you're accountable. And the whole of the Act and the Fire Safety Act have been looking to find people who are accountable. Note the name of the person who owns a building in order to operate it when it's a residential building, when it's occupied, is known as the accountable person or the principal accountable person. There's a very good reason for it. Here's a little illustration. The building safety competence criteria, that's the overarching one I've mentioned, 8670. And then we've done these three PASs below for the specifics for the designers, the principal designers, principal contractors, and those who are responsible for managing safety in residential buildings. There are an awful lot more. All of these are free for download, and whichever discipline you're in, if it's any of those, you need to understand these quite carefully, quite well, because you'll be judged against them. What is already in place? A lot of you will be used to the SIPs and so on and so forth, SIP organisations, safety schemes in procurement, which has been used over the years to have a look. That tends to look at health and safety. These Building Safety Act and others looking at spread of fire and structural safety. So it's a much wider than just general idea of health and safety. So while the SIP organisations, and I can't mention them, but you'll know many of them and have probably worked with them to do things, will no doubt have to change some of the questionnaires. Not that I've spoken to them, but what they do now is, they don't, for instance, look at behaviours. So there's a lot more stuff to come. The Fire Sector Federation published an approved code of practice for fire risk assessor competency. That will give you a guide, if you're a buyer of fire risk assessors, at what type of competence level do you need your fire risk assessor that you wish to employ. Yeah, as I've said, 8670 is being converted into a full standard. So you can see all the work they've been doing behind the scenes over the last 2 or 3 years. These are, I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can see it goes right up to 2025 and it'll go on further than that as various elements or disciplines or roles within the built environments are looking at their competence levels within their own organisations or professional trade bodies, and judging against it. So that's just a list of what's coming out and isn't about. Organisational competence, we are looking, as I say, 8670, this framework at the top, it looks at individuals. We're now going back and looking at how we may judge an organisation that holds himself out as competent to undertake the work he wanted to do. So we'll be looking at in there is, have you got the individual competent people, the individuals who are competent to undertake all the activities that your organisation seeks to deal with. Yeah. And as I've said previously, I think there needs to be somebody at the top of the organisation who has a jolly good idea, has got the appropriate skills, knowledge and behaviour to manage all those below them. So, you know, where you're a manager role, you're now going to be accountable, and you're accountable even more so by way of making sure that the people you, let us say, appoint to go on a project or a job, that they're competent to make sure that they are competent to undertake the job you're giving them. I've mentioned corporate culture, and the fourth bullet there, I've underlined the word evidence. This is important. People are going to, and the regulator and the people who procure are going to want to have evidence that the organisation and the individuals have got access to the competent advice, either themselves or internally or externally. But that word evidence is something that needs to be stored, and it'll need to be stored in the safety management system or your competence management system, both of which are much the same thing. So at the bottom there, we're saying all things considered, an organisation has the capability to deliver what it is and the capacity to do it. Yeah. So the capability is the sort of competence levels. I've got enough people in my organisation, all with different competencies, but collectively they can deliver all the activities that we're being asked to do, and I've got enough of them to do it. As I mentioned, the HSE is going to use, I mean, I said, how are the HSE going to judge that the person that they're talking to is competent? They are going to go back to these PAS standards. I picked 8673 because that's the one I was most clearly involved with. So there are in 8673 some structures of the sorts of competencies you're going to need, and there's pretty good detail in there. Be you an organisation or an individual, which includes your knowledge of an operating environment, your ability to lead and manage in a team, building systems. Those who've read it, it may be quite a few, you've heard about Dame Judith Hackitt talking about buildings being systems rather than just blocks of one thing or another. Operational practices, risk management. Now, that is not just a health and safety thing that we've done, or it's not a fire risk assessment. It's understanding how to manage risk in a holistic way. Putting together all these different reports and understanding all these risks and being able to prioritise them according to the reasonable, likelihoods and the vulnerabilities. Yeah, and planning, monitoring, and control. How can you manage to do that? So that's what's in that standard. And individuals and organisations are expected to have an adequate level of competence in each of those things, which is set out in the PAS. If you're involved in that, in the management of safety in residential building, you need to understand that well. That's just a picture of it. As I say, it's free from the website. The scope of that, which reflects building structures and building systems, operational, this is the scope of 8673. For an organisation. I'm not going to repeat all of it, you can read it on the threads, but managing the golden thread of information, including other digital, which is quite a lot. And you'll see there on those bullets, managing change, including the consequences of human behaviour. Again, that word's come back in. Leadership, planning skills. And the last bullet, ethical behaviour and professional standards. Going for organisations and the individuals within those. In Annex A, and Annex A is going into much more detail about what these things mean, so you can do your own sort of personal gap analysis. And Annex B is commenting on how one might be judged. So it's how do we assess that you've got that right, or you have an adequate competence thereof. I come now to specifying, as I mentioned, specifying the job. If you are going to try and employ someone, and you've got to judge the competence of them, you're going to need to specify to them, and indeed I would suggest to yourself, exactly what it is the job is, so you can then judge the criteria of the people you're trying to employ against the criteria you need to finish the job. You need to ascertain what information you can give them so that they can understand what it is, and you need to make sure that's accurate and verified as accurate. When you're looking at a contractor firm, a subcontractor firm perhaps, and in the past we've all been guilty of saying to a contractor, oh yeah, you've got a sticker that says the organisation has got a British standard or something. You need to now check that the individuals that contractor sends onto your job, whatever that job is the individual being managed? Are they competent to the work that you're expecting them to do? So it's got to go beyond the bland concept that the organisation's okay. Yeah. And you need to look, therefore, and what will be looked at by the regulator and those who are trying to judge organisations, how and I say contractor, I mean that in the wider sense, how the organisation manages the competence of the workforce. So how do they make sure that the people they're using and putting out there? And I would just point to the last bit, the last chance to assure yourself that you've got a competent workforce on the site that you're responsible for is immediately before that job starts. As in, you know who should be coming there, you've probably gone through a method statement, a risk assessment, you've checked the stuff. Is that the same person who's turned up on site? Right, that's the end of it. I hope that was useful. There's a very clear focus on competence managing and monitoring of your own employees and the contractors. The regulator is going to have a good look at that at least every 5 years. You're going to need to keep all this, it's all part of the safety management system. Yeah. Who is managing this stuff? Who's managing the monitoring the competence? And I would say data management and appropriate reporting is going to be absolutely critical. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful and a guide to where we're going, but there really is a focus on competence. Thank you for listening.
So thank you for joining us at Fire by Live this year, Anthony, and for delivering such an engaging session. So you described your views on competency, but what do you think the HSC's views on competency are?
I am absolutely certain that they're very, very carefully focused. As I mentioned, they've actually got a complete committee keeping an eye on it. You know, the independent competence committee, and I also know that they're going to use those PASs and presumably others to be the judging bit. They'll judge you about it. So make no mistake, they're absolutely focused on it.
That's great to hear. So what's next in the industry for you?
Oh, a lot of my time currently is being taken up with trying to put something called the Building Safety Alliance on the map. We, as part of, after Working Group 8 finished a couple of years ago, we had the kernel of cooperation with people in the occupied sector, which you didn't want to lose. So we've created something called the Building Safety Alliance, which you can find online, obviously, and LinkedIn and all the rest of it. And that is, we are building a forum for the whole of the occupied sector, right from the owners and the residents, the insurers, the financiers, the government, everybody come together so we have a forum to debate this and try and implement this in a practical way. And that's where a lot of my time's taken. So I'd encourage you, the Building Safety Alliance.
Well, I look forward to seeing how that's going to develop. So thank you so much for joining us at Fire by Live, and we really appreciate your time here. So if you would like to ask Anthony any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to him on the platform or via email. Thank you.